Okay, thank you.
Yes, hello from Helsinki. My name is Krista Kaihovirta, and with me I have Päivi Leppänen.
Hi, nice to meet you all. So we both work in a development program called New Literacies. And today we speak about the Finnish framework for digital competence, as Juha just told us. And at the beginning, I will tell you about the framework at the general level, and then Krista will show you the descriptions by details. So let's start. Our main focus is to make sure that every child and young people have right to digital competence. The goal is that all students in Finland would have equal opportunities to achieve the digital skills that are needed for studying, working, and social participation in the society. And in Finland, we have pretty highly educated teachers. We have quite digitalized society, and still research show that digital skills haven't developed as it has been expected in the curricula. So that's why we are here today. We want to tell you what we have been developing in Finland last 3 years. So I'm sorry for this not that clear picture, but we have Finland's digital compass, which together the digital vision of education will be the guidelines for all development next years. And digital competence has a quite big role in both of these guidelines, of course. The digital compass is based on European values and the Digital Decade 2030 program, which might be familiar to you all. And the compass supports us to development of digitalization and data economy next years. You can read more about it later if you're interested in. We'll share the link to all of these materials. So we all know DigComp 2.2, which was published last year, and it's a great framework for citizens in Europe. And a few years ago, we started looking for European frameworks for schools and for education. We analyzed the European situation quite widely, and we found out that there are frameworks, models, descriptions in many countries, but we didn't find any age-based or year class-based high-quality detailed frameworks. So in Finland, we have the national core curricula that includes digital competence and media literacy as a part of multiliteracy since early childhood education, which means that we have to support teacher when teaching digital skills. And we ended up creating our own national framework since we didn't find any good one in any other countries at that time. When we think about digital competence, children and young people, they have a lot to say. Digital world offers everything to them, and we have to think about what is the role of school in this. In Finland, we have some research that shows that young people have said that all digital skills they have are from their free time. They say they haven't really learned those things in school. So school hasn't been able to give them these skills that they feel important themselves. And to us, this sounds something like that we can imagine the situation that children would say that they haven't really learned math in school, or history in school. They have learned it at home and being with their friends. So we think there is something we have to do in this. It's a great thing that they learn by themselves, but still, what is the role of school in this? We know that they don't learn everything automatically. They need practice. So what we did, we made the framework with a wide cooperation. We had, you can see the highest line that tells all the networks that were involved when making this framework. So there was a huge group of people and tech companies and so on. What we asked was that what are the critical digital skills? For example, what are the basic skills that every 12-year-old child should have, and so on. And when thinking about use of digital tools, thinking about media literacy, thinking about programming, we found out 3 main ideas that we want to highlight. And you can see them here. One is creative production. The second one is active agency. And the third one is thinking skills. And Krista will later show you something like how you see it in the detailed description. So the digital competence framework includes 3 parts. One of them is ICT competence, the second one is media literacy, and the third one is programming competence. And the reason we made this is that we want to support the education providers to implement core curricula locally. The framework is based on the National Core Curriculum for Early Childhood Education and Care, the Core Curriculum for Primary Education, and for Basic Education. And the aim is that the education providers update their digital strategies and plans that are made earlier, and they use this national framework to implement it locally. And the Ministry of Education has funded the education providers by 12 million euros last 2 years to start this work locally. So this means that every teacher in Finland should have the framework in their hands this year or at least next year. And shortly about our core subjects in school and how digital competence is part of all of them. Here you can see all the subjects that are studied in basic education in Finland. And multiliteracy, as I said, it includes media literacy and digital competence are integrated in all of these subjects. So any subject of this you teach digital competence in Finland. And these multiliteracy and digital competence are so-called transversal competencies, and there are 5 more of them. We'll share you later some material if you are more interested in. You can read all about them. So here you can see the 3 parts, and Krista will now introduce the competence in details, or all the competencies, these 3.
Yes, just a moment.
Yes. Okay, let's take a closer look at the descriptions of the digital competencies. And if I scroll out, this is the whole set of the descriptions for ICT. And digital competence includes 4 parts. We have the practical skills and personal production. We have the responsible and safe use of ICT. Then we have the information management and inquiry-based and creative work. And then we have the interaction part. And they have all their own color. And we present the detailed descriptions here. Let's start with the basic technical skills. And we have built it up in circles, as you see. We have the early childhood education and pre-primary education in this smaller circle. And these for the small children, the descriptions are targeted to the educators, and not that much to the children, because in this age there's no learning demands on the children. But when we go further to the school, we see that from 1st to 9th grade pupils, and here's everything that they should, all the skills are explained here, what they should have when they finish the 9th grade. And now I will show you a couple of learning paths that we find here in the circle. Let's start with the production part. And when we zoom in, you can take a look at them here.
For example, tuosta oli kommentteja, että jos voit zoomata vähän lähemmäs. Joo, saat laittaa tuosta kommentteja.
Joo.
Ei se haittaa zoomaamaan kameraa hippää.
Ai.
Jatkaa.
Joo. Ihan niin. Joo, okay. Let's go on. We have the yes, the production circle. Yes, and we have here, if we look at the pupils in the 1st and 2nd grade, they should take photos, record videos and sound, and carry out simple editing. And the learning path goes from this level to the next. Here on the 3rd to 6th grade, they should already know how to edit this material. And then further to the 7th to 9th grade, they should know how to use image and video processing software diversely already. So here's the path that happens during these years. Then we can go further to the safe use of ICT. I'm not going to show everything here, but we have collected some good parts. Here you can see it. And here, if we look at the 1st and 2nd graders, you can see that the pupil learns how to operate safely in digital services. The pupil knows what to do when he or she needs help. And on the next level, we have this, that the pupil starts recognize the possible risk situations in the digital services. And then on the higher level, the 6th to 9th graders, they should understand the principles of personal data use and observes the introductions concerning data. And also, here's also the GDPR mentioned that on the elder pupils understand that something like this exists and knows the principles of it. And then if we go, and here was another. This path is about collecting data, and the pupil on the 3rd to 6th grade is aware of the ways in which digital services collects data. And when we go to the next level, the pupil knows that they are being profiled based on data collected by digital services. So here you also can see the development of the skill. And then we had information management, and this was something we have been talking about quite a lot lately. And this is not a path, but this skill we have already on the 1st and 2nd grade, that the pupil should practice explaining in his or her own words the information, not just communicate the information, but also process it himself. And this is something, because many times we can see that the pupil only copies and reads it up, for example, but this is a skill that should be trained from the 1st grade. And that I forgot to tell you that when you read these circles, you can see the empty spots, the empty space here around, and that means that the skill that was told earlier continues. So, for example, this skill I just showed you, it continues to the next and 2nd level also. Yes. And something about inquiry-based and creative work. And here we have a path about producing content. And as you can see, on the 1st and 2nd level, the pupil do it with guidance, is able to suggest producing content, and so on. And on the next level, for 3rd and 6th grade, they are already making his or her thinking and competencies visible. So here they are managing it themselves. And then on 7th to 9th grade, the pupil are actively bringing up his or her ideas and competencies and interest with the help of digitalization. So they are using the digital tools the way they like or choose themselves. And then the last example I will show you, we find here in the last circles, that is about interaction. And we find it here. Starting from the 1st grade, with guidance, the pupil is able to resolve conflict situations that may arise in digital services. And on the next level, we have knows how to interact with different groups in digital services. And on the third level here, the pupil is able to resolve conflict situations, and here comes many more things also. So the knowledge or the skill is growing and being wider also. Now, I think, do you, Päivi, want to say anything else about this?
Yes,
I forgot the camera.
Yeah, we had some technical problems. We are sorry for those. I think it was all.
Yeah.
Maybe one more thing is that when you, and we mentioned many times, digital tools, applications, services, and so on. So it's meant that locally the education providers write themselves which are the tools and which are if they're using computers, tablets, phones, and which are the applications they have and so on. So we don't, in Finland, we don't nationally guide schools and teachers which applications they should use. This is a question that we are asked many times, so that's why I mentioned it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. This is all from us, but now I think we have time for questions or.
Yes, thank you, Päivi, and thank you, Krista, for a very lovely presentation. Very, very interesting. Do keep the questions coming. There is something in the chat for SALTO Digital. Specifically, we'll address that later. And I didn't see questions yet in the Q&A, but I have one for you guys in the meanwhile, when people are still maybe writing their thoughts down. I realize this might be a tough one, but coming from the youth sector and working right now in a cross-sectoral SALTO center, my question would be, since you mentioned that young people indicate that they learn a lot of their digital skills on their free time, does this model or this framework, does this somehow, in your opinion or your view, does this support and stimulate cross-sectoral support and cross-sectoral cooperation to kind of get young people to learn more? I mean, I saw that the framework didn't at least explicitly mention the youth sector, but organizations, yes. So is that kind of between the lines, or what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think we haven't really done cooperation that much yet. But I think this research is one reason that we should maybe start discussing about this, because the children are the same even when they are home and they're having free time, and then they come to school or go to other places. So we should pay attention on that, I think. And one thing that we know that there are many things that they don't learn by themselves that easily. And one thing to mention something is, for example, to tackle misinformation and disinformation, it is something that they really need support and practicing. And we are worried about that if no one teaches these things to them. So thank you for your question.
I simply see a lot of potential there also for the youth field to learn from these kind of frameworks, because I see a lot of the topics are the same. As you said, the children are the same. And I really like the progression that you've built into it. Youth field has the tendency to kind of approach things from a very practical basis, often without this framework coming at least first. So there's a lot, I think, to unpack both ways. We have a couple of questions here. Mariana is asking, does this imply that students at age 6 should own their own cell phones and other devices?
It's a good question. We know that in Finland, over 90% of 6-year-old kids have their own cell phones. So when this is the fact, we think that we have to prepare them to use them. And since they get their first phone, they have to know how to use it. So actually it does. They don't need it every day. They don't, when they go to school, they are not given phones or tablets all the time. but at least they have the thinking about how to use them and how to behave starts even before when you are 6. It starts earlier, I think. But of course, we want that the early childhood education and pre-primary education would have very good learning environments, and digital tools are part of that learning environment, as well as any other toys and books and so on. So they are not something special, but they are natural part of it.
Yeah, at least we're building a good base where to build when they get their first cell phone. They at least know something about this world already.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the framework as Krista said, in early childhood education and pre-primary education, it's not telling what the child has to do. It tells what the child is learning and what the adults are doing with them. So it's kind of other way to look at it. And in a basic education, we describe that what is the minimum skills of the students.
And there's a lot of these descriptions, as you saw. None of them is about passive use of cell phones or any media. Everything is something how to use them in a good way to produce something own, and of course the awareness of the world also. So
yeah, there is a follow-up question from Marianna, which is, I think, interesting also from this cross-sectoral perspective, because I know youth work tackles with this problem a lot as well. What happens if your student does not have a cell phone? If you're doing an activity in school where you're rolling it around their own mobile devices, then what happens if a student doesn't have a device or a particular kind of device? So does the school then provide the device, or what happens?
So
it's about the digital gap and access, yeah? Sorry.
Yes, yes, it's a big problem of inequality if this happens, but we think that school offers the tools and equipments and everything you need in school. That's where we start. It's the fact. But then in some situations, of course, the students want to use their phones. They want to show something. They are familiar with them. So in some situations, they are allowed to use them when teacher lets them and when it's the right moment of it. But the main idea is that school offers all equipments that are needed in school.
Yeah.
So children don't they are not expected to bring their own phones in school or their own computers. This is when we speak about basic education and children under or before it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the same is recommended in the youth field mostly, in the sense that also to make the practitioners' lives easier, but then you have one device to figure out around a certain digital activity and not 10 or 20 different kind of devices to figure out why they're not working. So that would be my recommendation for the youth field as well. There is an interesting one from our team, so from Pasi. First of all, thanks from Pasi also for an interesting and wonderful presentation, and a question: how do you see the relation between digital skills like computational thinking and general metacognitive skills like problem solving, critical thinking, etc.? How do you see this relation between the two?
I think they are like you can separate them. If thinking about programming competence, it all starts about thinking, and I think students have to practice both of them at the same time. They go hand in hand. That's what I think. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I also think that it's a natural thing to combine, and it comes in the programming part.
Yeah, and there is computational thinking is something that we start in early childhood education. They don't need computers or tablets or phones when they start about playing games and using their body when moving to this direction or that direction and so on. So it's a lot of playing without any devices.
You can actually do that analogic up to higher level in the school and yes.
And when thinking about safety and privacy, it's a lot about thinking and understanding, respecting each others and so on. And then you practice it in the digital world, like social media. That's where it happens then, and you can see if you have learned like how to behave. So, but maybe it's not that simple, but at least some points.
Yeah, I don't think these topics are ever simple. There is a comment, follow-up comment also, that there is a concern around this whole stuff regarding inclusion and some other issues around digital devices, but that's a longer discussion, and the discussion will for sure continue in these digital dialogues as well. We have a session coming up on digital inclusion in June, so there is a lot to unpack here. A couple of quick questions still on the Q&A panel, since we have plenty of time. Question from Mihovil about like starting levels. So is there a standardized question form or something similar at the beginning of a primary school and later on in the beginning of high schools to gauge kind of the level where students and learners are at? So is everybody on the same level of digital competences? How do you test that?
The fact is that in Finland they haven't been at the same level, and that's the problem. We have had tests like national tests, but right now they are not updated with our framework yet. So right now we don't have one national test, but it's something that we should start preparing pretty soon. We have some, like in early childhood education and care, there is one test. It's quite updated, but it's something that we really need. We cannot continue developing if we don't have the data of what's happening in schools.
And then they are using the skills in the different subjects, and then the teacher will give the pupil a grade in her or his subject, and there's maybe it maybe shows if the pupil is good in these things or not. So yeah, the products that the pupils are producing. Yeah.
Thank you again, ladies, for a wonderful presentation. We will move on because we know that Andreas has to be somewhere else in the near future. So we'll jump into the second topic of the day with digital competences and the youth programs and the youth sector. A lot to unpack there as well. So Andreas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Juha, and to the colleagues for the presentation so far. Let me see that we get the technology here sorted. Always the exciting moment, whether it keeps working in the moment of pressure. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the work that we have done at Youth Policy Labs and with many partner organizations throughout Europe around digitalization, a topic that has really shaped our work from our very beginnings. Our very first international seminar in 2008, when we were founded, was called Non-Formal Education Goes World Wide Web. Which we did in Estonia, and since then the topic has stayed with us. And for those of you maybe not so familiar with the youth field, we are facing an interesting dilemma in our sector in relation to digitalization, which has to do with one of the core principles of youth work, which is that we want to be, as youth workers and youth leaders, as professionals working with young people, we want to be as close as possible to the lived realities and real lives of young people. It's one of our core principles of working. And when it comes to digitalization, we currently are not, right? Young people are by majority much more digitally competent than most youth workers are, and there has a certain sense of fear and anxiety developed around digitality in our field. That has to do with shifting power relations, because what does this do to you as a youth worker and youth work professional when young people actually know much more about such an important topic than you do? It's also a lot to do with stigmatization, and that much of the media debate is around the dangers of the internet and social media much more than the potential, and so on. So that's why one of our driving ambitions and hopes and motivations to work so strongly and consistently in digitalization is to turn this fear into fun. Right? Youth work is mostly, not always, but it's mostly something that's enjoyable for everyone who is involved in it. And we want to contribute to making digitalization joyful in youth work as well. So I want to talk about our project just very quickly, our approach that's behind it, about DigComp itself, but then in particular about the adaptation that we have done for the youth field with DigComp Youth Work, and what our future plans are. There at the bottom, you see our partner organizations, 5 organizations in the German-speaking part of Europe, which is also what makes our project maybe a little bit unusual as a project that was funded as a Key Action 2 strategic partnership by the European Youth Programs, because we purposefully decided to do this particular project in German initially, because many of the youth workers who in the German-speaking sphere of Europe are, let's say, maybe a little bit afraid or quite distant to digitality and digital things and digital tools, are also youth workers who tend to be not very eloquent in English. So we didn't want to put up a second barrier, if you see what I mean. So that's why we started this particular project in German and are just right now in these very weeks and months finalizing our English translation of all the material that we have done. So you see a couple of German things in here, but I'll take you through in English, of course. So what we have done in our project is we adapted the European Union's Digital Competence Framework for Citizens, which I think most people here know, with the unfortunate abbreviation of DigComp, and adapted it to the youth field, which is a mechanism that DigComp explicitly foresees. There are a couple of adaptations already to other fields. There is DigComp Edu, for example, for formal education. There is a DigComp...
Andreas, sorry to interrupt. The sites are cut off on your presentation at the moment, so they're cutting off for some reason when you made it full screen. We are missing some of the text.
You're missing some of the text. All right.
Now we see everything when it's like this, yeah?
Yeah, now you see everything, but then probably now let me see if I put it on this screen. Do you see it now completely?
Perfetto. Please continue.
Nice. Very good. Well, good that, there was no slide with text so far. Okay, cool. All right. So what we have done, thanks for pointing that out. That's always better to be interrupted and fix it. So we have adapted a DigComp to the youth field, and then more importantly than this adaptation itself, we developed a curriculum for youth workers to become more competent across the competence areas of DigComp youth work, so that they over time are empowered and also encouraged to be more creative, more reflective, more emancipatory in how they integrate digitality into their youth work and into non-formal education. So what we, I said this already a little bit at the beginning, what we wanted to do is really help youth work tap into the joy of digitalization, but also to help digitalization to tap into the joy of youth work. And what we strongly believe from our experience in this field is that as long as youth workers do not move with confidence and joy through digital spaces and digital spheres and digital media themselves as human beings first, digitality and youth work will not be a good match across the field, right? And we are not talking about the nerdy avant-garde of our field. You know, we have, of course, Werke, the Competence Center for Digital Youth Work in Finland. We have quite a few other organizations around media literacy and digital media literacy, but sort of at the base of the field, youth work on the ground in local youth clubs, local communities. That's where our problem with digitality and digital youth work sits. And that's what we are trying to help crack. We do know that the problem that we have is really not a problem of political will, and which is rare for the youth field, it's also not really a problem of a lack of resources. The problem really is adaptation in the field, right? And colleagues from the German Youth Institute and their Center for European Youth Policy looked at discussions around youth work in preparation of the most recent European Youth Work Convention. And one of the things that they found is that digital youth work is an exception because it is mentioned in quite a number of policy documents. There is a council resolution on digital youth work. There's a council resolution on smart youth work, for example. But then when it comes to documents of the field, professional documents, training courses, descriptions of curricula, what have you not, it is hardly ever mentioned, right? So the problem is not that we don't have the framework to do something. The problem is we're not doing enough. And so that's what we are trying to contribute to changing. Here you see the 5 competence areas of DigComp. Just as a reminder, these are sort of the 5 core areas of DigComp in its neutral format, and then several adaptations have added competences and or competence areas to these. The 5 here are very straightforwardly around information and data literacy, around communication, collaboration, about digital content creation, about safety, and then the 5th one is around problem solving. So what, and then it has 4 different competence layers, starting from very foundational to intermediate to advanced to highly specialized, which in total is 8 different competence levels. And the curriculum that we have developed moves sort of in the first half, right? So we are trying to really bring novice digital youth workers from a foundational level to the beginning of an advanced level, so to competence level 5 approximately. So what we have done is we have taken the concept that was developed around digital youth work by the expert group set up under the European Union work plan a few years back, which talks about digital youth work as a trifecta of activity, tools, and content. And that is exactly what we have integrated into DigComp's adaptation for the youth sector. So to look at digitality as a theme for content in youth work, to look at it as a helpful tool for youth work, and also to look at it as a format for activities in youth work. And that is, of course, one of the most important misunderstandings, that digital youth work is only about running youth exchanges, for example, in digital formats. And it's really so much more than that. It's not at all about transforming everything we do in the youth sector into digital spheres. It is about learning how to interweave digital things and analog things in our work in similar ways to how young people do that already quite confidently and competently. So we have added 2 new competence areas to DigComp for our adaptation. One we have called Digitality and Society, which has 4 competences in it, which have to do with understanding cultural phenomena arising from the internet and how they change, to be able to understand and critically reflect on identity formation and how that changes through digital worlds and spheres, to be able to understand how power and power relations shift in the context of digitality at societal level, not only in relation to people, and to also be able to understand and reflect on and hopefully also be able to co-shape visions of digitality, right? To be able to understand what someone like Elon Musk is doing with a platform like Twitter, to be able to have an opinion or develop an opinion on that, and to be able to act accordingly and use the platform differently, use a different platform, help young people understand what that all means for them. And then the seventh one, not so surprisingly, centers then on digitality and youth work directly, where we have, again, 4 competences: help youth workers understand, reflect on, apply definitions and dimensions of digital youth work, exactly what I just spoke about, that it's not just about methods, but it's also about tools, and it's importantly also about contents, to understand and work with digital realities of young people and what these digital realities also mean for young people, to be able to reflect on values, principles, and methods of digital youth work, and also how digitality influences values, principles, and methods of youth work more widely, and then to get to know and apply methods and tools for strategically planning digital youth work, so it becomes less of an ad hoc thing and more of a planned and deliberate choice. And so what we have done is, for all 7 competence areas of DigComp youth work, we have developed one curriculum book. Here you see the 7, and even though some people might find that ironic, we have actually developed and printed them, right? So that trainers and youth workers can actually work with them in non-formal education on paper and are not necessarily reliant on doing this all online, right? The idea is on putting this training into the context of training opportunities as we normally run them, which is non-formal education courses, seminars, workshops, weekends, weeks, and so on. We all know what we are talking about here. We have run pilot courses with them, for which we have equipped every participating youth worker, 30 across Europe, with their own iPad, so that the question we discussed just in response to one of the Q&A, so that the question of access to the digital tools necessary for this work was, at least for our small project, settled. And then here you see sort of the structure of our open educational resources. So when you flip through these curricular books, through these manuals, then you have, for every competence, a thematic introduction, and you always have 2 exercises, one to get you started and one where it becomes a little more nerdy and geeky. And then each of these also have supporting materials, handouts, and so on. Right, so here you see an example of a thematic illustration and introduction. So for each of these competences, which in total are 29 across DigComp youth work, we have one of those introductions, but we have also worked with a young graphic designer from Switzerland, Daria Rüttimann, who has developed these illustrations also specifically for each of these competences. So we have 29 of these quite cool illustrations there, which are all published under an open source license, so you can use them. And then here you see an example of a handout for an educational exercise. And in total, our curriculum has some 500 pages or so. And like I said at the beginning, we are at the moment translating them all to English and are just about to be done with that. So what's going to happen next? We are adding languages. The English translation soon will be done. We are adding Spanish, French, Italian next. We are also very open if national agencies, for example, say we would love to translate this whole curriculum into Slovenian, into Finnish, into whichever language tickles your fancy or you work with. We will gladly make the source material available. It's anyway all published as open source, but also the sort of the technical files behind it, so you can do the translation easily. We are doing training for trainers courses. We have done pilot courses anyway over the past 3 years, but we are at the moment running a German speaking training of trainers with 2 modules, and we are adding an English course next year, and will also in the next weeks bring an English website about the whole adaptation online at digitalyouthwork.org. We already have digitale-Jugendarbeit.de, the German one, but that's of course in a European context not so super helpful. Here you see the photo credits that I have used across the presentation just for purposes of recognition of the artists and photographers and sources of the material. And then maybe just my final point to reiterate again, youth work we think can and should be fun also when digitality comes into play, and it should not be a matter of being afraid or being full of anxiety. And that's what we are trying to get at here, to help youth work as a field at large and at scale come to a happy relationship with digitality rather than a fearful and full of anxiety one. Here you see again our website, digitalyouthwork.org, still grayed out because we are still working on it, our Twitter and Instagram accounts. And with that, thank you very much for your attention, and back to you, Juha.
Thanks, Andreas, for a really interesting presentation. Nice catch with the picture there on the final slide. Good times from Vienna, I believe.
Yes, I thought you would like it.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate it very much. I really liked the shift or the topic you had around digitality and society. And I've had some interesting talks around youth work practitioners and youth work researchers there. And this might be just me, but I feel that there is kind of a dichotomy in a way in orientation in youth work practice, in the sense that some are really practice oriented, some like to do things, fun things, as you said, also in digital youth work with young people, and some have a really reflective role towards society. Okay, some also have both. My question to you is, when you say that digital competences should be reflected in terms of societal power shifts, do you believe that the field has the capacity for that as a whole? And if not, where can they get support for it? Easy one, I know.
An easy one. So I would say, by and large, the field currently does not have the capacity to do so, but that particular one doesn't worry me so much, because neither does society at large have the capacity at the moment, right? Digitality moves so fast. It's both a very young field of research, but also just a young experience for all of us as humanity, that I think we all struggle with that. And I think it's fairly clear to most people moving in the space that the idea of letting billionaires run all of our platforms is a silly one, and that the European Union has made quite a few proposals for how to establish public infrastructures for internet communication, for example, is a very exciting development, but also just one, where the final recommendation was just adapted a couple of weeks ago at the beginning of 2023. But then where can the field get support? I mean, it's maybe a bit of a cheap answer to start with, but part of that is, of course, that you guys exist, right? That SALTO Digital has come into existence and will start taking on a more active role as a resource center specifically for this topic. I think will in the long run have a very powerful consequence for the field. I also really hope that the SALTO Training and Cooperation Resource Center will start maybe running dedicated courses on digital youth work, which is also something that the SNAC project recommended they do. And we will obviously also be very happy to contribute our curriculum and all our training materials to that. But I think in the end, what really we have ahead of us is a massive qualification effort that we have to undertake. And we are obviously just a small part of that, but it's hard work. It's going to be a grind. I'm sure that as much as this topic has dominated our work in the past decade or even two, I'm sure it will continue to do so in the next decade or two.
Yeah, it's certainly not an easy discussion, and it's maybe not also a comfortable discussion to have within the field. Like, what is our societal position in sort of these things? I mean, another question also kind of related to power shifts. We've seen over the last few days, actually, big tech giant people like Elon Musk coming out and saying that, hey, you should probably push the brakes a bit on AI development. So ChatGPT, for example, should stop where it is for a while. And that's been partially seen as their kind of reaction to the power shifting towards smaller companies. Now, AI in itself is obviously a huge shift as well. The development is so fast that we are all left in the dust. And Pasi posed a question in the chat, like, how do you see that AI will change or modify the digital realities for young people? Another really easy question, yeah?
Yeah, I like the easy questions. Oh wow, that's a really hard one. To be honest, I mean, I am certain it will change 1,000 things, but I am really uncertain about in which ways. I am in general a very positive and optimistic person, and alone already to see what young people have done in the short time of availability of ChatGPT and how cleverly and smartly they have started using the availability of of that chat engine for just fun things, really just exploring it mostly, and also at the same time how in formal education, maybe more than in our own field, discussions have started. What does this mean now for higher education, for example? I participated in a seminar with higher education lecturers and professors who were, quite at a loss at what that means for them. These tools make not just knowledge available, which we also have through great things like Wikipedia, for example, but it makes the logical connection between knowledge much more accessible. And I find the impact of that tremendously powerful. But how exactly that will play out, I am as curious as any other person on this planet, I guess. But I don't really have a good answer to that, I guess. But I think what's important is that as early as we possibly can, we start just playing with stuff like that in our work, both with young people and with colleagues, rather than just wait and sit by and hope that somehow somebody will come along and tell us what to do. Because young people will do it anyway, whether we are with them or we're not with them. So if we want to stay relevant for young people as a field and a profession, then I think the kind of tinkering attitude is one that we need to adopt much more strongly and just play with that stuff ourselves and see what it can do and what it cannot do. One thing that we did, for example, just like 2 days ago with a couple of colleagues from the RAIN network, right, our research network for the European Youth Programs, is all of us asked ChatGPT, what is the RAIN network, without any additional context. And we got 7 different answers. So I can tell you, for example, that one RAIN network is a crypto network, and we have our own currency. Whoop, whoop.
That's very cool. I mean, it's a good example also of experimenting, but also taking it with a grain of salt, like the output that comes out there. And I think there have been both recently there have been calls for open-minded experimentation and having a curious mindset, but at the same time having also a critical mindset in terms of how much do we use commercial platform, for example.
Yes.
And I guess a lot of it is to find a balance with all this. Yeah,
absolutely.
Cool. Thank you very much, Andreas, for your input. And that is it for today for our topical things. But all of our participants live in the session do not go anywhere while we thank our presenters for this session. So the next time in SALTO Digital Dialogues in about a month, our topic will be participation in digital games and also media information literacy. And the speakers we will announce on our house page, so stay tuned for that. So all of you watching on YouTube after the fact, see you on the next one.